Europe was once the beating heart of global innovation. It spearheaded the Industrial Revolution, shaped modern economies, and led in trade, manufacturing, and technological progress. But today, it risks becoming an economic afterthought. Let's put things into perspective. The European Union still holds the title of the world's second-largest economy, boasting a combined GDP of nearly $18 trillion. That's no small feat. It is home to some of the most advanced nations, a highly educated workforce, and world-class infrastructure. Yet, for all these advantages, Europe is slipping behind its competitors at an alarming rate. And the numbers make this decline crystal clear. Back in 1980, Western Europe's GDP per capita was almost identical to that of the United States. Today, the gap has widened dramatically. The US has surged ahead to over $80,000 per capita, while the EU lags far behind at just $40,000. The trend isn't just an anomaly, it's a decades-long pattern of stagnation. In 2023, the Eurozone's GDP growth crawled to just 0.5%, paling in comparison to the US at 2.5% and China at a staggering 5.2%. And then there's the stock market, a crucial indicator of economic health and investor confidence. Since 2009, the US S&P 500 has soared by over 500%, whereas Europe's Stoxx 600 has barely managed a 200% increase. That means capital, innovation, and opportunities are flowing elsewhere. So why is this happening? Why is an economic powerhouse that once shaped global trade, banking, and technology now struggling to keep up? The answer isn't simple. Europe's economic slowdown isn't caused by just one factor. It's the result of multiple interconnected crises. A shrinking workforce, burdensome regulations, soaring energy costs, and shifting global markets have all played a role. But there's one issue that has amplified every single problem: a critical labor shortage caused by ineffective immigration policies, an aging population, and a brain drain of young, talented workers. For years, European politicians touted immigration as the solution to labor shortages and economic growth. The idea was simple: bring in more people, increase the workforce, and fuel economic expansion. More workers mean more productivity, higher tax revenues, and a larger consumer base to drive demand, ultimately boosting GDP and sustaining welfare programs. Sounds logical, right? Well, in theory, yes. But in reality, Europe's immigration system is broken. And instead of solving economic problems, it has created new ones. The key difference between Europe and countries like the US and Canada is how they manage immigration. In Canada, over 60% of immigrants are selected based on their job skills, education, and work experience. In the US, immigrants make up nearly 25% of the STEM workforce, contributing significantly to industries like technology and engineering. Both of these countries use immigration as a strategic tool to strengthen their economies, ensuring that newcomers actively contribute to innovation and economic expansion. Europe, on the other hand, takes a reactive approach. Instead of actively attracting skilled professionals to fill labor shortages, the continent has accepted over 10 million migrants in the past decade, primarily due to humanitarian crises. While offering asylum to those in need is commendable, the failure to integrate these individuals into the workforce has turned immigration into an economic burden rather than an asset. The numbers paint a stark picture. In Germany, only 43% of refugees are employed after 5 years. In Sweden, that number is even lower, just 37%. And even when immigrants do find work, they are often trapped in low-paying jobs that don't significantly contribute to economic growth. So, what's going wrong? One major issue is the barriers to entering the job market. Unlike in Canada or the US, where immigrants can quickly integrate into the workforce, Europe's labor system is filled with obstacles. Complicated job certification processes, strict labor laws, and language barriers prevent many from securing stable, high-paying jobs. This lack of economic mobility keeps many immigrants dependent on social welfare programs rather than allowing them to become active contributors to the economy. Another challenge is social integration. Unlike in the US, where immigrants often assimilate quickly into the workforce, newcomers in Europe face systemic hurdles that make integration difficult. Many rely on government assistance due to the difficulty of finding employment, creating resentment among native populations and leading to political backlash. In countries like Sweden, for example, nearly 60% of welfare recipients are immigrants, despite making up a much smaller share of the population. This has fueled a growing anti-immigration sentiment across the continent, pushing governments to tighten immigration policies even further. Perhaps the most fundamental issue is the mismatch between immigration policies and economic needs. Europe does not prioritize filling skill gaps when accepting new arrivals. Instead, its immigration policies are largely shaped by humanitarian crises, meaning that many immigrants lack the qualifications needed to contribute meaningfully to the economy. This contrasts sharply with Canada's model, which strategically selects immigrants based on labor market demands, ensuring they can integrate smoothly into industries that require skilled workers. Resultantly, Europe finds itself in a paradoxical situation. It has accepted millions of new arrivals, but has failed to integrate them effectively. Meanwhile, as immigration struggles to fill labor shortages, Europe is also losing its most talented professionals to better opportunities abroad. And that leads to an even bigger problem: the brain drain. While Europe struggles to integrate new workers, it's simultaneously bleeding its best talent. Young, highly skilled Europeans are packing their bags and heading to countries like the US and China in search of better opportunities. And the numbers paint a grim picture. Between 2010 and 2020, Germany lost over 180,000 highly educated workers. France, Italy and Spain are facing similar trends. The UK alone loses 40% of its AI PhDs to the US within just 5 years of graduation. This means that Europe isn't just losing its brightest minds, it's actively fueling the success of its competitors. But why are they leaving? The answer lies in 3 core issues. First, high taxes and bureaucracy make Europe a difficult place for ambitious professionals and entrepreneurs. Many European countries have some of the highest tax rates in the world. In France, corporate tax rates exceed 30%, while in the US, they're around 21%. Combine that with slow-moving bureaucracies, rigid labor laws, and excessive regulations, and Europe becomes an environment that stifles innovation rather than encourages it. Starting and scaling a business often involves navigating months of paperwork, restrictive employment laws make hiring and firing costly, and complex regulatory requirements discourage risk-taking, pushing many talented individuals to seek opportunities elsewhere. Second, there's a lack of opportunities in high-growth industries. The US is home to tech giants like Google, Apple, and Tesla, while China aggressively invests in AI and advanced manufacturing. Europe, meanwhile, struggles to produce global tech leaders. Even successful European startups often relocate to Silicon Valley, where they can access investors, talent, and a more business-friendly environment. Finally, weak support for cutting-edge research is driving top talent away. The US and China attract the world's best minds by offering high salaries, better funding, and fewer restrictions. AI is a prime example. Over half of Europe's best AI experts now work in the US because research funding is more abundant and regulations are less restrictive. This brain drain is a ticking time bomb for Europe. A continent that once led in technological breakthroughs is now watching its best minds innovate elsewhere. The long-term consequences of which are slower economic growth, weaker industries, and an ever-growing reliance on foreign innovation. And this is just one piece of the puzzle. Another major reason for Europe's economic decline is its fading manufacturing industry. Europe was once the global hub of industrial prowess. For decades, the continent's factories produced everything from German automobiles to French aerospace technologies and Italian luxury goods. Manufacturing was the backbone of Europe's economy, contributing to prosperity, job creation, and global competitiveness. But today, this dominance is slipping away at an alarming rate. Manufacturing, which accounted for 25% of Europe's GDP in the 1980s, has now shrunk to just 14%. Entire industries are relocating, plants are shutting down, and products that once bore the proud label "Made in Europe" are increasingly being imported from China and the United States. These industries were not only key economic pillars, but also sources of global influence. However, over the last few decades, Europe's manufacturing supremacy has crumbled. Emerging economies like China, South Korea, and India have caught up, offering lower labor costs, massive industrial subsidies, and aggressive government-backed strategies to dominate key sectors. Meanwhile, Europe has made manufacturing more expensive and less competitive, driven by soaring costs, high energy prices, and the lack of a coherent industrial strategy. One of the biggest challenges is the high cost of production. European labor costs are among the highest in the world. In Germany, manufacturing wages are nearly 50% higher than in the United States and 5 times higher than in China. As a result, many businesses are forced to either pass these costs onto consumers, making European goods more expensive and less attractive globally, or cut jobs and scale down operations, further weakening the region's industrial base. Another major factor is Europe's skyrocketing energy costs. Europe's industries rely heavily on affordable energy, yet even before the 2022 energy crisis, German electricity prices were already twice as high as those in the US. After the crisis, they skyrocketed to nearly 10 times what manufacturers pay in China. This has forced major industrial players like BASF, Volkswagen and Airbus to shift production to the US and China, where energy is both cheaper and more stable. Without competitive energy prices, Europe's heavy industries are losing their ability to compete on a global scale. Perhaps most damaging of all is Europe's failure to respond to the industrial strategies of its global competitors. While China introduced the Made in China 2025 initiative, investing billions to dominate high-tech manufacturing, and the US passed the Inflation Reduction Act, pouring $370 billion into domestic industries, Europe has largely failed to craft an effective industrial strategy. Instead of incentivizing production, EU policies have burdened businesses with higher costs, stricter regulations, and an uncertain policy environment. Without a clear vision to support domestic industries, Europe is falling behind, while other nations aggressively expand their manufacturing base. As a result, Europe is no longer an industrial leader and has become a net importer of the very goods it once dominated: cars, semiconductor chips, and even high-end luxury items. If this trend continues, Europe won't just lose its manufacturing edge, it will become permanently dependent on foreign industries. Further, manufacturing has historically been a driver of innovation, research, and skilled employment, creating synergies with other high-tech industries. As this foundation weakens, Europe's broader competitiveness in emerging fields such as artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and digital platforms is also eroding. This industrial decline is not just about lost factories, it signals a deeper struggle to remain at the forefront of the global economy. Unlike in the US and China, where government policies and venture capital fuel tech innovation, Europe faces systemic challenges that have stifled its ability to keep pace. One of the biggest barriers is regulatory overreach, which has made it difficult for European tech startups to thrive. Policymakers have prioritized regulation over innovation, often with unintended consequences. The GDPR privacy law, for example, was designed to protect consumer data, but has instead crippled European startups by imposing complex compliance requirements. Meanwhile, American and Chinese firms operate with far fewer restrictions, allowing them to collect and utilize vast amounts of data to develop AI, digital platforms, and advanced analytics. Instead of fostering a thriving tech ecosystem, Europe's regulatory-heavy approach has created a hostile environment for innovation, where companies struggle to scale or compete globally. Another major obstacle is Europe's fragmented market, which makes scalability a challenge. The US and China benefit from large, unified domestic markets that give startups instant access to hundreds of millions, or even billions, of consumers under a single legal and tax framework. In contrast, Europe is a patchwork of different tax structures, labor laws, and business regulations. A startup in France faces an entirely different set of rules than one in Germany or Spain, making expansion across the continent costly and complicated. This lack of cohesion forces many promising European companies to either relocate to the US or remain small and uncompetitive, depriving Europe of potential tech giants. Compounding these issues is Europe's chronic investment gap in the tech sector. Cutting-edge innovation requires massive financial backing, yet venture capital funding in Europe is far below that of the US and China. In 2023 alone, American startups raised over $250 billion in venture capital, while Chinese startups secured over $70 billion. European startups, by comparison, received less than $50 billion, an enormous shortfall that limits their ability to scale and compete. Without sufficient funding, Europe's brightest minds are leaving for better opportunities abroad. More than half of Europe's top AI researchers now work for American tech firms, where they benefit from higher salaries, greater creative freedom, and superior research infrastructure. This brain drain ensures that the next Google, Apple, or OpenAI won't be built in Europe. But Europe's list of issues doesn't end here. It extends far beyond manufacturing and technology. The continent is also grappling with an energy crisis that has put its entire economic model at risk. While innovation and industrial competitiveness are crucial, no economy can thrive without a stable and affordable energy supply. And in this regard, Europe has made critical miscalculations that are now threatening its long-term prosperity. Years of aggressive but poorly executed renewable energy policies have left the continent vulnerable, with high costs, unreliable supply, and a dangerous dependence on foreign energy sources. Europe's transition to renewables was ambitious, but it was deeply flawed. Nuclear and coal were phased out too quickly, without securing stable alternatives to replace them. At the same time, Europe became overly reliant on Russian natural gas, with over 40% of its gas imports coming from Russia before 2022. While wind and solar energy held promise, they proved to be unreliable as primary energy sources due to supply fluctuations, leaving Europe exposed to energy shortages. Then came the 2022 energy crisis. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Europe lost access to its largest source of cheap gas, sending energy prices skyrocketing. The consequences were immediate and severe. Electricity costs surged. Germany's energy prices alone rose to 10 times higher than those in China, making manufacturing uncompetitive. Entire industries, including chemicals, steel, and heavy manufacturing, were forced to cut production or shut down entirely due to unsustainable operating costs. In an attempt to prevent economic collapse, European governments spent over $600 billion on subsidies just to offset soaring energy prices. But instead of investing in long-term solutions, these massive expenditures were merely a temporary fix, draining public finances without addressing the root of the crisis. Meanwhile, the US secured energy independence through its fracking revolution, ensuring a steady and affordable domestic energy supply. China, while investing heavily in renewables, continues to expand coal production to keep energy prices low and maintain industrial competitiveness. Europe, however, remains trapped in an energy paradox, caught between high costs, unreliable supply, and politically driven policies that prioritize rapid decarbonization over economic stability. If Europe fails to reform its energy policies, the consequences will be devastating. Industries will continue to shut down or relocate to countries with cheaper and more stable energy sources. The continent's manufacturing base will shrink further, weakening its global economic standing. And without affordable energy, Europe risks falling permanently behind the US and China, not just in industry, but in overall economic power. Energy was once a pillar of Europe's economic success, but if the current trajectory continues, it could become the very thing that cements its decline. Europe's economic decline is not inevitable, but reversing it requires bold, strategic action. If leaders fail to address labor shortages, overregulation, industrial decline, and energy instability, the continent will continue to lose ground. The choice is clear. Will Europe adapt and reclaim its position as a global economic powerhouse, or will it resign itself to long-term stagnation?